Welcome back to the Fantasy Rugby Draft podcast. Thanks for downloading and listening again. I'm Bruce Wilkinson, and joining me in the booth is the man primarily made of moss, Nathan Mossman. Thanks for pulling in, mate.
Yep, pleasure as always. And my first draft of the week, of the season is coming up this weekend. So I don't know about you, but it's getting real.
It is getting very real. The time doing the podcast and looking after the site and doing a bit of admin, I haven't had a lot of time to actually sit down and listen to some of your advice, my advice, Reg's, Andrew's, Cooch's. So I'll be doing a lot of cribbing in the next week, I would assume, next 2 or 3 days, I would have thought.
Yeah, you're getting your excuses in early, that's for sure.
That's right. It's not like I pulled the number one draft pick out of my own hat as well. So, Yeah, something to be said for that.
Well, I'm not convinced that number one draft pick is actually a good position to be picking, and perfectly. But
that's a really good point to raise. So I was sat in the pub and I got my wife to pull it out. So pulled 1 through 10. We had it in a pretty robust environment. She wanted to have it videoed. I was like, well, I think the boys kind of trust it. She pulled my name out of the hat, and I looked at it and I thought, well, actually, if I threw that back and started again, I think that might be looked at being a bit more of it because, as you said, I'm not sure the 1 through 3 or 4 is actually where you need to be. I think that sweet spot might be 5 to 7, and I think we've talked about it in previous podcasts. Now, we do have a couple of points to bring up on those positions because we've got a little bit more news coming. But if you had your choice, 1 through 10, what do you think you would go?
So having looked at it, and based obviously on my own rankings, I'm sort of leaning towards taking something really late. So my sort of initial feelings were that maybe 9 or 10 would have been good spots. And just my thinking is that once I get that first player in that 9 or 10 spot, then I know exactly who I've got and what I need to do in that second spot. And because I'm essentially picking next, it's back in my hands. Whereas if you get one of those early ones, you've got a long time to wait until your second pick, and a lot could change, between those picks, which could throw out your strategy. So I think there is something to be said for having 2 picks close together and just being able to work your strategy around that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I did a bit of analysis around that kind of 9 and 10. And I think it's for a 2-round strategy. I think that's pretty good. What I did find though is once you're a long way between picks in that second round and the third round. So there's a lot of really good players that fall in that position that I kind of want to have rostered. So I was looking at bringing in a little bit earlier in the third round. So potentially having it, say a 6 or a 7 might actually be the best spot to draft in, but. You can lay these best plans, and all of a sudden, someone selects Malachi Fekitoa as their number 1 overall draft pick, and all of a sudden, certain players drop to you, and then you're starting to get some value out of players you didn't think were going to land in your lap. So, the best laid strategy, best laid plans, can often blow up in the face of adversity.
Yep, absolutely.
Just a bit of admin first before we get into the news and notes. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rug Draft. That's Fantasy RUG Draft. We're on Facebook as well. And we've had quite a few mails, and we'll try and get to a few at the end of the podcast, but it's support@fantasyrugbydraft.com. A lot of questions around the draft, what the setup is, how to do offline drafts, basically around different strategies. We've had a couple of guys email in around their own thoughts on who should be 1 through 5, and that's great stuff. We love having that debate. It's really, really interesting. I guess we should probably get into the news and notes now. Actually, before I do that, I wanted to just reiterate the differences in the fantasy game that we're talking about. So we talk about drafts, so knowing when your draft day is, when that draft time is, and knowing that you have to be online in front of a laptop to be able to select your team. Now, it's okay if you're not. If you can't actually make it, if you make the conscious decision not to turn up, that's cool too. There's an auto-drafting facility which gets you a fairly good team, but if you have someone specific in mind, you should be there at that online draft. And look, it's a hell of a lot of fun as well. You see grown men crack under pressure quite readily in a 90-second scenario. So, yeah, get amongst it, but do be aware that it is different to the salary cap version. I think we see a lot of people their first time not really understanding that when the time is to select their team, and then not really understanding how to do it as well. So have a good read of the how to play. There's some videos up on the site to run you through it and how to add and cut players. But just know when your draft day is, and if you're joining a public league, try and find a time that's quite sociable for you, where you might not have too many distractions, or you might be in a fairly good internet situation. Jumping into the news, so the first I've seen actually in a more formal capacity was Green and Gold Rugby. They mentioned that the NZRU have indeed instructed the All Blacks to have 10 weeks off. Now, have you got any inkling about, and I'm inverting my fingers here in commas, what the All Blacks might be? What type of tier player do you think they've given this edict to?
Well, yeah, I actually saw something on the news about this the other day, which was, was specifically about this 2 weeks off. And in the news item, they talked about Kevin Mialamu, and they said in his case it's the first 2 weeks of the year that he was taking off. Right. So it's definitely something that's going to happen. Obviously, it's quite hard to predict, but I actually think 2 weeks is not a big deal. So if it was 2 weeks across the board, then I'd be pretty happy with that, and I wouldn't let that interfere too much with my drafting strategy. So, I guess that's the only information I've heard, so yeah.
It's an interesting one, that one, isn't it? Because the 2 weeks off, and maybe not in Kevin's case at the start of the season, but if you give some of these players 2 weeks off in week 9 or 10 or something like that, it might actually boost your fantasy chances. There's a chance you actually get better output because they're fresher and they've got, they don't have the niggles, they're not, slogging it out, carrying an injury. It may actually do more good than harm. And I think that's obviously what the All Black selectors are thinking for the World Cup. But I totally agree with you. If it's just the 2 weeks off. Now, we know that it's not the case for a couple of players like Kieran Reid and say Sam Whitelock, and there may be one or two others, but I think we're just talking about elite here. I imagine there wouldn't be more than kind of 4 or 5 of those types of players that they've said that to. I think the 2 weeks off will actually do more better or do more good than worse. The
other thing they actually had on this particular news item was they were talking to Dan Carter, who was there at training, and he was sort of under the impression that he was actually playing in this preseason game, and it turned out the coaches were saying, "Nah, you're on the bench for this one." But the thing that was interesting about that was that the fact that he's ready to go, and he's sort of under the assumption that he's good to go from day one. So for me, that just throws more doubt on the whole Carter Slade thing, which we covered last time, and I think I thoroughly berated you on, and I think this is starting to justify it, and I'll throw it back in your face once again. So
and that will be routinely thrown back in my face. I think I'm going to fight a losing battle with that one, because I do agree with your drafting strategy in the first round. There is just too much of an unknown there. And we don't know what the makeup is, and even if they are both starting, one of them is going to be eroding points when it comes to goal kicking. So we're on your side with that one.
Good. Can we get some sort of drop or recording of you telling me I'm right, and you can just hit that button every time it happens?
It might have to be a recording because it ain't going to happen again. So in the last podcast, we talked a little bit about Quade Cooper. And we talked a little bit about the extent of his injury. We offered some solutions. And some fairly straightforward one, obviously, with James O'Connor. But more we hear is and this comes from Quade, and it may be just boosting up a young fella's confidence, getting him used to the preseason, getting him entrenched in the squad. But Duncan Paia'aua, who it turns out actually is a young Bronco, young rugby league player. So I'm not sure they're going to throw him into the white hot cauldron of a Super Rugby start. But he's one to watch as someone that, if you do go with, say, James O'Connor, that you might just want to get late in the rounds, because Lord knows I can't imagine there's going to be too many people picking him up. Maybe they do because they've seen his name, but I think you'd be able to handcuff James O'Connor to him. What do you think about that, Mossman?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it, but I think I guess the main thing I'm looking at here is the goal kicking, and from that point of view, I don't see why you'd give the goal kicking duties to a rookie when O'Connor's, a proven goal kicker, and It's not like he's gone away somewhere and stopped kicking goals. He's been kicking goals for London Irish and for Toulon as well. So it still doesn't really affect my thinking towards him.
Yep, no, that's fair enough, and I certainly think that. It will be James O'Connor. at 10 as well. I think you hear a lot of these talks in pre-seasons, in any sport really. It's the young guy coming in, he's lighting up training camp, he's doing everything right in pre-season.
Pulling up trees.
Yeah, exactly. Pulling up trees is a good one. Wherein, come first game and he doesn't really get on the pitch until, maybe the 7th or 8th game of the season when his injury comes through. So it's a bit of a watching brief there, but we certainly still think it's James O'Connor, regardless of what Quade's preference might be.
Well, I mean, let's face it, you're unlikely to see a headline saying, Cooper calls Duncan Pioneer rubbish. Although, if it was going to come from anybody, though, I suppose it might come from him.
Yeah, that's true too. Another wee snippet that we picked out of, or was brought to our attention, was Nick White doing the goal kicking in pre-season. Now, that's how it finished in the last in Super Rugby last year. Now, I think we've discussed it. We ranked Nick White fairly high and Leali'ifano low because of how it finished up in the end of the season. And we kind of came around to what you said on the last podcast, Mossman, in that it's probably going to be, and I think also Reg said it as well, I think it probably is going to be a Leali'ifano kicking. But now that we've seen this in pre-season, what are your thoughts here? Is this just pre-season? Is this something a little bit more that we need to read into? Yeah,
well, it wasn't just Nick White that was taking the kicks too. I think there was a young guy called Rodney Ioana, I think, had a kick a goal as well. So we actually had this conversation with one of our Twitter users, didn't we? So so this is a shout out to Justin Pivas, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce his name, but so he pointed that out, and I guess there's a couple of ways to look at this. That you could say, it's a markdown for Leali'ifano. It's a worry, it's a concern. But the flip side to that is it is pre-season, and if you're ever going to try something, it's going to be in pre-season. And so maybe the fact that they're giving everybody a kick at goal, or not everybody, but these two, isn't necessarily a problem. So and the other thing I suggested as well is that I think Leali'ifano scored the try, but didn't take the conversion. So maybe a little bit like Thierry Henry when he was fouled for a penalty, someone else would always take it. So it might just be one of those things.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, our job is to sit here and try and pull to pieces pre-season and any sort of formations and any sort of patterns out of something that the coaches more or less use for trialing out combinations and certain moves and certain preparations to games. Which may not necessarily materialise, and also they're not going to show their hand completely. But goal kicking is an interesting one. It's one that you just don't really. It's not like you've got this hidden up your sleeve. It's either Leali'ifano or White or, as you say, Ioana. Not too sure, but
yeah. I mean, look, is it a concern? Yeah, absolutely. And I've moved Leali'ifano down.
I was going to ask that.
A few spots in my rankings, based on that. And I think that's just, it's not a knee-jerk reaction. It's just sensible. I just I'll say now, in that situation, I look at Mike Harris versus him, and I think, well, now Mike Harris at this point looks a safer bet.
Yeah, he separates himself, doesn't he?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
No, I agree. I had brought Leali'ifano back up as well, and right into just after Mike Money. But now I'm pushing him out of my top 10. Just for what you said in the last podcast, it's just that worry, that uncertainty, and I want. And it may not come to anything. It may well be that he's kicking goals and he's kicking them all. That's fine. But there's just a little bit of uncertainty now there that's nagging away, and that's something that I might try and steer away from. I may go for an outside back in that spot.
Yeah, I'm sure if week one, if you've picked Leali'ifano in the first round and he gets out there and you see Nick White coming up to get the kicking team, you're going to be pretty gutted. So
yeah, you are.
Yeah,
you are absolutely. Some bad news out of the Crusaders camp. So out of that game in Timaru against the Highlanders, Willie Hines broke his leg, and so did Johnny Mackay. Now those are certainly Johnny Mackay. I was really looking forward to. I think you brought him up on one of the very early rankings podcasts we had back in December. But he was lights out for Northland, and I was looking forward to seeing Nadolo and him on the wing. And now that Nadolo is delayed from Japan and Mackay's got his injury, What do you make of that outside back situation for the Crusaders, considering that Dag could potentially be rested as well?
Yeah, well, I guess it's good news for Johnny McNichol, if for no one else. That's probably the only takeaway that I had. Yeah, I did pick out Mackay and thought he'd be one to watch, so it's a bit of a shame from that point of view. But yep, McNichol, he'll definitely come up the rankings now. I guess you don't want to go crazy on these things too much because if it's just a matter of a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's probably not worth going too high on a guy when it's only a short-term option.
So at the end of last season, they had Ndolo and they had Fonatir on the wing. Now I read an article this morning around saying that they wanted to put Fonatir in a wee bit, to have him at 12 and have Fruin at 13 and a bit of a blockbuster. I personally don't see it, and I suspect we might actually see Fonatir out on the wing again as the world's slowest winger to play for the Crusaders, whilst Ndolo comes from Japan and gets back into Super Rugby form and acclimatises himself to the Christchurch faithful.
I would have thought there'd be some competition for the slowest Crusaders wing. I mean, Scott Hamilton has got to be up there, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got to be up there, but I actually went to school with Bubbles, and whilst not being particularly quick on the eye, he's got long strides. He swallows up the ground quite quickly. It's just the movement isn't great. And I watched Fonatir live last season, and my mum told me not to say anything if I didn't say anything nice, so I'll probably leave it there. Another player who was released by the Blues is Peter Saili. Now, he was one that was quite good about 2 years ago in Rugby Draft. However, he kind of tailed off last season, mainly because of the rise of, say, the Luatuas and Kaino coming back. But do you think we're going to see a bit more of Joe Edwards?
Looking at the trial team that ran out last night, which had Luatua at 8, that's a possibility as well. So I think if it's a case of just getting your best players out there, then possibly a Luke Braid, Jerome Kaino, and Luatua loose trio could be what we're looking at. So you see something in Joe Edwards that makes you think that he might work his way in there?
He probably won't work his way in there. I think you've nailed the loose forward trio. There will be times where Joe Edwards does start, though, because of the resting and because Kaino gets through a hell of a lot of work. I think there won't be a hell of a lot of resting for Luatua. I think they'll want to see him at the full season, get back to where he was in the middle of last season or start of last season. But Joe Edwards he's a freakish talent. He's a big lad. He's quick. He looked really good for the New Zealand, the junior All Blacks. And I've been, waiting for him to. I actually thought he might get picked up by another province in the Ron Cribb style. I thought because of those back three, and also because Peter Saili was there at that point, that someone might have a shot at poaching him. Now I suspect they probably have because they've seen the talent. But fair play to him. He stuck it out in the Blues. He's going to give it a shot. And it may be because he does see there's opportunity there this season with a lot of the resting. Another Fantasy Rugby Draft favourite of ours, not so much for the Crusaders or the All Blacks, but for Fantasy Rugby Draft managers, is Radicki Samo. He's gone to the Rebels. What do you make of that, Mossman?
Well, not much. Unless he gets a run on the wing,
Sure, sure.
Potential. I don't know. How old is this guy now? 40? I mean, Jesus, it seems like he's been around forever. So, and it's the Rebels as well. So, I don't know. It's I'd take it with a grain of salt, really. Yeah,
I will be interested to see how much game time he has got and where he does fit in. I think, they've got a couple of good youngsters in there, and certainly Sean McMahon rising through as well. So I don't think they'd want to erode any of his playing time, and I think he'll want to make a big, strong push for the Australian team as well for the Wallaby World Cup. So, and they've got Higginbottom there as well. So I think, he might be someone to come on and throw a bit of pill around a little bit later on in the game. But I think, as he said, he's been a Fantasy Rugby Draft points bonanza in past, but I'm not entirely sure he can repeat those.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he does ever get the call up to the wing, then you'll be laughing. But
that's true. Another player who wants to actually move positions, a la Samo, and perhaps not quite as drastically, is Israel Folau. Now, he made a little bit of noise last season about moving from outside back, or at least fullback, to in the centres. I think Gibbo at the time said, you bide your time, you learn the tray, you learn the running angles, you learn the lines back there, and then come back to me next season. And it sounds like one of those things you see footballers say, right? They go through their agents, they leak it in the press to just kind of put it out there in the general medium, so that it slowly seeps into the recess of Gibbo that he has to make this decision at some point, as opposed to just walking up to him and saying, "Can I play 13 today?" So what do you make of that?
Yeah, well, okay, so, he's keen on a switch to midfield. I mean, good for him. I'm keen on trying to punch David Warner in the face, but, we don't always get what we want. Might have a better shot than he does, to be honest. But I think, he's been so effective at fullback that, what would be the motivation for actually trying to, from a coaching point of view, to make that move? If it did happen, I'd actually not necessarily, convinced it would have a massive impact on his fantasy output. I mean, in terms of, line breaks and that kind of thing, I think in tries, he's probably going to be just as involved, if not more. He'll probably make more tackles. He might not get, quite as many running meters, but, he might make up for it in other areas. So
I was going to say, he might make up for it in offloads, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
He's breaking a line and he's getting his hands through to Beale or to one of the big fellas outside him.
And he's making a hell of a lot of offloads as it is, and that's on a reduced probably number of touches, and he'll get more touches. So it's not something that's going to concern me.
No, I don't think so either, and I can't imagine they're going to upset too much of a winning formula at this point of the season. The news coming out of South Africa is unfortunate for Sergeant Peterson. He's for the Cheetahs, and I understand it's a jaw. I'm not entirely sure, but I think he's out for a length of time as well. He was someone that was quite exciting. He didn't play a hell of a lot of games. He got injured last season, but whenever he got on the pitch, he's nifty. He makes breaks, and he's a little fly buzzing around everywhere. He's really, really impressive. What do you make of that, and what do you think the Cheetahs will do? Do they have enough to kind of compensate in that, or do you think they've got bigger issues elsewhere?
Sure, it's a loss for the Cheetahs, but I don't think he was probably someone that you're looking, particularly to draft on your team, considering that, they've already got a bit of firepower, out wide, and, in terms of drafting, you were looking at Cornel Hendricks and particularly Wooly LaRue, who's been, ultra consistent actually in fantasy rugby. So from a fantasy perspective, not too much of an impact.
No, I think it's a fair analysis. Another South African that's broken his leg this time was Bandasi Maku, so the hooker for the Bulls. So they recruited quite well in the off-season, and they got Adrian Strauss. So whilst it's a loss for him and potentially the Springboks as well, he may come back by then, but I don't think it's going to have that bigger impact for the Bulls. What's your take on that, Mossman?
Well, yeah, they bring in Adrian Strauss in, they might, lose money on the food bill, but whether they're actually losing a lot in the player department, I can't really say because I don't actually know much about Maku.
Sure. No, I think the only other note we were going to talk to was the game that was last night, the Chiefs Blues game they played up in Whangarei pre-season. And whilst we were talking about before, you can't read too much into player points and who won and lost and by margin. You kind of try and pick out individual performances, and what we were most interested in was who was going to win that fly half position for the Chiefs, whilst Aaron Cruden was rested in the first couple of weeks and maybe even a little bit later down in the season. And one player that really stuck out for me as I was hearing the reports is Damien McKenzie. Now, he kicked the goals, but he also sparked a few line breaks as well and played really quite well. Would he be your kind of keep an eye on at the draft? Would he be your backup to Aaron Cruden, or who do you think that even might be?
No, I think that's a fair call. So if you are looking to handcuff, a player, and I don't know if we've explained handcuffing before, but essentially that just means that you pick two players in the same position from the same team, and what you're counting on is that if one of them's out, that the other one will sort of slot in and have hopefully a similar level of production. And I think from a Chiefs point of view, at the fly half position, then it looks to me like Mackenzie is that guy. So maybe somebody if you do draft Aaron Cruden, that you might want to come back in later rounds and try and get Mackenzie. And he might not have ordinarily been a guy that you'd been looking to draft, but you'll do it just because of Cruden.
Yeah, and you may be able to have those first two, you get a really good fly half in those first two matches, and then there's potential that he actually could play 15 as well, because that was where he was playing for the juniors, and I think him and Pollard were players of the tournament. I don't think anyone actually put a finger on any of Damien Mackenzie's runbacks. His counter-attacking, he just stops on a dime. He's an impressive player. It's a bit of a shame we went to score, but we'll set that aside for a second and just focus on the fact that he could actually play 15 as well. So Nanai Williams, we think, or at least I think, I don't know if that's what your view is, Mossman, but I've got a feeling he might be at 15, and someone that, because he's listed down as a midfielder and playing at fullback, is also another one to keep on your radar at draft time. What do you think about the 15 for the Chiefs? Yeah,
well, Robbie Robinson's still there. Andrew Horrell's played there as well. So, it's not like there aren't guys that could fill that position. So I wouldn't count on that.
Yeah, Robbie Robinson was one that was good as well. He's certainly got good counter-attacking skills. So they do have options back there, and I think if you can figure that out, and maybe you don't want to take a risk in the first couple of rounds and leave, as we were talking about before, get your safe picks. But he's a good one as well that you could draft a little bit later, and if you can get that fullback or outside back for the Chiefs, then I think there's some good points there. It's been a few days since we last spoke, Mossman. Has there been anything that you wanted to bring up? Any news and notes that you've gleaned out of the press that you wanted to have a chat about?
It was actually just going back to that game for a moment. James Lowe scoring 2 tries, so he's a Fantasy Rugby Draft favourite. Right. So that's just something to note. And Simon Hickey getting the start. So obviously, early days, but maybe a sign that he's in the lead to get the number 10 jersey for Auckland, with Simon Hickey coming off the bench.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Iha West, yeah. Don't really know what to make of that. Yeah, maybe he's the clubhouse lead. Maybe they're trialling out because they know what they got in West. That's a really difficult situation. Would you change your rankings at all now and drop West down a few and bring Hickey up, or is this just pre-season for you?
I think I might. I probably would bring him up a couple of spots. I'm sort of starting to lean, toward West. I think they kind of know what they've got in Hickey, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were thinking that he's not the guy that's going to move them forward as a franchise.
It's an interesting one because he's a young guy. So I agree with you, but it sounds strange to say that they know what they've got in him, because I totally feel that way as well. He seems as though they know the type of play that he actually produces in the back line that he runs, whereas I think they want this Iha West, because you remember the Force game last year, that first half over in Perth. That's the type of game that I think John Curl wants to play. Now, that was a dry track in the middle of, I can't remember if it was March or April, but they just completely blitzed them. They put on, I don't know how many tries it was in the first half, but that was some of the best rugby you'll see in a long time. And that was all because Iha West was their 10, and he was that challenging the line and really, really gelling with the outside back. So I agree. I think that's where they want to go. And if you can get an Iha West or a Katrakilis or a Joe Peterson coming back and pair it with, say, maybe you miss out on Folau and get Mike Harris, or maybe you get someone like Ben Smith and or a Lealiafano, then that's great too. But I think Iha West is some good value, even though that we saw a lot of Simon Hickey in the preseason.
Yep.
We have a few emails that we'll get to, emails and tweets. So this is from Christian from, name and place, Mossman?
Hutt Valley, I think.
Hutt Valley. He says, in a 10-team league, is there a potential to get sold out if you don't have access to a front row during bye weeks, especially since there are only 15 front rows? And that was his question. The short answer is yes. Mossman, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I considered last season trying to draft a whole bunch of front rows just to screw everybody else. And in the end, I had to give the strategy away because I actually, figured it can quite easily go wrong. So I don't see that being a problem. I know in past drafts, people are sort of unlikely to have two front rows. It just doesn't, really benefit you. And also with front rows, we'll see what the contribution's like this year. But as we noted earlier when we were talking about point scoring in one of the earlier podcasts, that they're not massive contributors. Now, whether that holds true this year or not, I don't know. But your front row should be basically the last pick that you're going to make. And the reason for that is that we don't really know which front rows are going to be good this year, if we're honest. We can look at what happened last year, but, it's, the thing is, with it being three players instead of just one, you don't need to change that dynamic very much before you actually, you don't know what you've got.
Yeah, I agree. So season on season, it's really hard to try and pull out which front rows are going to repeat. An example is the Chiefs in 2013, they were the top front rower, and then they were second to last the year after. Now, there are certain players that left that you can probably draw parallels to it, but that actually didn't make the difference. They scored the same amount of tries. So it's really hard to pick consistency in front rows. So another point around the front row is that you've got 6 bench spots. Those are critical. You need to use those spots to have your outside back flyers, to have your midfield flyers, to have a fly half that you might want to have a go at, and it's really, really costly to fill that up using a strategy of trying to block someone for the 2 game weeks that actually have the three teams missing and down to 12 only front rows. So whilst it could be a cunning strategy, I think you might be cutting your nose off to spite your face, so to speak, in that your opportunity cost of having someone on that bench that may blow up and be one of your best players in the future and just stashing him until it happens is too greater opportunity to pass up. And another point is that you can trade. Now, if you get into a massive spot and you do find that front rows are contributing a hell of a lot, and that you definitely need one week in and week out, and you definitely need one that produces for you each week, you may have to pay over the odds to someone who has got a couple of front rows trying to do that strategy. It depends also who you're playing as well. So there's a lot of strategy in it. We went this way because we like this strategy. We don't want to make it easy. We see a lot of games where you can shoehorn a lot of good players in your team, and we don't find that much of a challenge. This is a challenge, and being able to manipulate, see when the bye weeks are coming up. You need to know when they are, when you're drafting as well. It's an important bit of information because all of a sudden you might have 6 players on a bye in your team, in your squad, and then all of a sudden you've got to make some hard choices about who you need to drop. So one school of thought is get your whole team on a bye on the same week, and another school of thought is try and trickle it during the season. So depending on which way you want to lean.
So you might just take the L in that week, you reckon?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know I've done it in other forms where, you see all of a sudden you don't have any players to field and you just don't bother picking up free agents and you take the loss. And every other game week you have more an advantage than everyone else. So there is a strategy there, but I guess coming back to the point, you've just got to be aware when those bye weeks are and plan for them. We have another question here from Bevan Smith. There's a couple of questions in here actually. His first question was, how is the order sorted for who has the first pick through to 10th? So in an online draft, it's done via the tool. So 2 hours before your draft date and time, the site locks the draft and locks you in, and it sorts out the draft order, and it does that randomly. So once you get in 2 hours before, click on the join draft, and you'll see what position you are in the draft on the right-hand side, and you've got 2 hours to do your strategy. If you're doing an offline draft, so with a bunch of your mates, that's a whole different kettle of fish. There's all sorts of different weird weird and wonderful ways that you sort out draft picks. We pulled it out of the hat this year. My wife pulled it. Other people have picked a horse, and whatever position they finish in the Grand National is the position of the draft order, and all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. It just adds a little bit more to the off season as well. Another question from Bevan again was, how long can a draft go for? Which is a little bit like how long is a piece of string, because some people are well into taking 90 seconds, but invariably you'll find that it's pretty short each time. Most people understand what they're doing, and it takes 0 to 30 seconds, roughly around that than actually going through all of it. And if I was to stress which part of the draft you should be in, I would say the first half. Once you get into those kind of 12 through 17 rounds, unless you've got someone really specific in mind, you're going through a lot of backups and you're trying to figure out names that you haven't heard of before, or names that you think might go quite well. So certainly turn up at the first half. Just on the offline draft functionality as well, it's important to note that if you need to get everyone signed up before your draft, then you press the download draft example, and what that does, that has all of the teams already allocated in a particular order. Now you need to just go through as players are selected, and you do your own timing, whether you're in a pub or at a rugby club, or whether you're at home with a bunch of mates like we're going to do tomorrow. Just keep track of time, put them on an egg timer, and then just cut and paste that player alongside the person or the team name. What's most important is that the format stays the same, so that the site recognises the same format. So if you do actually manipulate your round and you change the draft order, just put it back to the format of which teams were in which spot before you upload it. Otherwise, the site doesn't understand this new draft order, and it'll produce an error. What are your preferences, Mossman? Do you like the online draft? Do you like the offline draft? They both got their merits.
Yeah, definitely. Probably one of each, which I think I'll probably be involved in a couple of leagues this year, and it'll be one of each. I think if you're with a bunch of mates and you're having a few beers and a barbecue or something, I think the offline is it's kind of ideal. That way you can sort of get together and take your time, and it's a bit more of a social thing because you're doing it as a group. If you're sitting there and staring at your laptop, it's obviously not quite the same, but very convenient. And probably a little bit more rapid as well, given the performance of some people after a few drinks, myself included.
Yeah, that's true. It's not only does that 12th to 17th round get quite convoluted when you're trying to read some names that you haven't seen, it also gets a bit hazy. There's a lot of chicken wings, a lot of buffalo sauce, and a lot of alcohol and trash talk by that point. So it's important to have your rankings that you can fall back on and rankings that you can read. So this Monday, the world stops at about lunchtime in New Zealand for the Super Bowl. What are your thoughts there, Mossman? Who's going to take it away, the Hawks or the Patriots?
Well, I'm kind of obligated to go Seahawks because I've got a few friends that support them, and I'll go Hawks.
Yeah, I think.
I think what I'm really hoping for is another Richard Sherman rant.
We all are, mate. We all are. Yeah, I was looking at a couple of prop bets, listening to a podcast with a couple of prop bets today, and one of the interesting ones was talking about the first play as a Brady completed pass, which is a bit of a nod to Deflategate. That was an interesting one. So yeah, for me, I think the Hawks are probably the better team, but I actually think the Patriots might win it. I think they're not going to be able to stop Gronkowski. If they do, obviously they win, which is a simple thing to say when it comes to the Patriots.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's probably all the time we have for here. We're probably going to try and fit a couple more in before the main draft weekend, which is next weekend. We hope to have Cooch Town on again and have a chat with around what he's seen and different draft values, players that we've seen rising in the draft and players that we've seen dropping in the draft, and see if we can draw any analysis out of those. Again, just a quick reminder, please send us your questions. We love them. There's some great strategies and theories coming through. We love them. You can hit us up on Twitter, which is Fantasy Rugby Draft. It's Fantasy RUG Draft, or on Facebook, or send us an email at support@fantasyrugbydraft.com. Thanks for listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson. He's Nathan Mossman.
I got nothing.
Up to you, Rapido.